Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Mahin the podcaster, and I am really excited for today's show. We are graced today with the presence of Shaykh Umer Khan, who is well studied in the Islamic sciences. He has Mufti qualifications. He's a student of Shaykh Akram Nadawi, and he's also the vice president, or formerly the vice president of technology at Spacex. I just learned as of a week ago. So Sheikh Omar, thanks for coming on the show.
Assalamu alaikum, Mahin. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at the UMJA conference. Was that back in September, right? I was there to record with Sheikh Mustafa Omar, who you know very well. We won't share how that relationship worked, but you guys are very close. And I was walking through the lobby and I ran into Sheikh Muhammad Faqih. And Sheikh Muhammad was like, hey, Sheikh Yasser's here, Sheikh Yasser Qadi, why don't you go say salams to him? So I popped into the, y'all had this little breakfast area where y'all were sitting, right? And when I was there, I happened to see you, but I was like, someone looked familiar, and I think you were sitting with Sheikh Jamaluddin Zarabozo.
Yes.
Right. And I was like, but this guy looks familiar, but I was like, I couldn't pinpoint who he was. Like maybe only Chicago guys. Right. I do the podcast with Sheikh Mustafa, and I asked Sheikh Mustafa, like, who you're staying with in your hotel room? He's like, oh, the Sheikh Umer Khan. And we were talking about like productivity and deep work, like Cal Newport's philosophy, and how he introduced and how he used some of that in his own work. And he was like, you need to interview Umer Khan. And I was just like, and he was telling me a little about you. When he described you to me, I was like, wow, this guy seems like perfect for the kind of show that I'm trying to produce, like helping Muslim men live this like deep life and be productive and whatnot. And we were supposed to, I think, meet that day because I was supposed to give you a ride to Darul Qasim, but then you had a meeting with Sheikh Akram Nadawi, which you couldn't, he's your teacher, so you weren't able to make it. So long story short, Sheikh Mustafa connects us via text, and then you reply to me. You were like, "Hey, Mahin, I think we met before," and I was like, "Really? When?" And you would reminded me that, and it's unusual because maybe this speaks to how low key you are, but usually I don't forget this kind of stuff. You reminded me that we had met when Sheikh Akram came to do a hadith class at the American Islamic College, Dr. Jonathan Brown, and we had dinner at Kababi, a Persian restaurant, with one of your friends, Sheikh Abu Zaid from New Jersey. And I know Abu Zaid, and I remember you were sitting right across from me telling me how you went to Illinois Tech back when it was IIT back in the 90s and whatnot. And then it rang. I was like, whoa, you were like right across from me, and I had no idea. So it's interesting how this connection kind of works. So first, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show, and it's very rare that I could have somebody who is living this kind of like parallel life, so to speak, right? So I want to kind of start off by asking you a little bit about, maybe your career first, and we can get into a little bit about the Islamic studies sides. But you were at Illinois Tech in the 90s. What did you go to school for?
I went to school. I started as a major in electrical engineering.
Okay.
Because when I grew up, I would open every electronic, thing up.
Yep.
Whether it was a TV, or in my days it was like a VCR or little
Mhm.
toys. And my parents would come home and they'd find things have been opened up. All the screws are loose. The wires are all over the place.
Mhm.
And I'd be like, what are you doing? And so I'd be putting things back together to make sure they work again. So I had this fascination with just opening things up to understand how they work. And I thought becoming an electrical engineer meant that I'd be able to, fix my own TV and maybe build my own TV or something like that. And so that's why I got into electrical engineering. A year into it, I realized that's really not what engineering is about. That's maybe more like a vocational school where you learn about electronics.
Right.
So I ended up majoring in computer engineering and computer science, and that's how I graduated.
Yeah, in the mid 90s, I was an electrical engineering major for like a semester, and I realized what I hated about it was I couldn't hang with the programming. And you remember back in the day, I've heard now that today programming, when you're coding, a lot of the simple bugs the system will catch for you, right? But back then, and I thought about that with Sheikh Mustafa as well, if you have a semicolon in the wrong spot in your code, you could be looking for hours, and it's really like a 10-second fix. The problem is finding it, right?
Yeah.
Did you have that challenge when going to school? Like, do you think there's a certain kind of mindset or brain that people should have if they're going to be a computer science or programming, especially it's becoming such a trend these days for people to get into?
Yeah, I mean, I think my mind was wired more towards science and math. And so I do think I picked the right major where what I was learning was aligned with what I liked. And I quickly realized that in electrical engineering, for example, you have these circuits,
Yep.
and you're always trying to calculate like voltage and resistance and amps and power and all of these different things. And you have to apply, like, there's Kirchhoff's current laws and voltage laws, and you're doing all this math, but there's a lot of analog. Like you have to really understand how the circuits themselves work. And I found myself attracted to the digital world, where it was more about like more things like programming or designing computer like semiconductors, chips. And so I just gravitated more towards what I thought was more aligned with my own interests and passions, and that's how I ended up with computers.
And what was your first job at a college?
Interestingly enough, my first job out of college was maybe a journey I began when I was 12. So I would fix people's computers. Like if something goes wrong, going back to opening things up, I would open it up, figure out what's wrong, and swap out the right components. So at the age of like 14, I think I was doing an internship for a summer in the US, working for a company, building a network and creating databases for them so that they could put in like their advertising leads into a database and call up salespeople could call people up and figure out who might be attracted to this type of service and product. So I kind of like built on that even in college. I mean, when I first started college, I was working as a waiter because that's just what happens when you come to the US and you can't quickly find the right job.
Right.
So I worked as a server, and I would clean tables and things like that. But I quickly got into a job in the library just fixing computers. And so I'd open computers up and fix them, network them, connect them together, run applications on them. And that, I think it was like second year of college when I was at a local job fair within the college, and somebody came recruiting and they're like, "Hey, you know how to work with computers?" They're like, yeah, I know how to fix all of this stuff. And so they hired me as like a help desk guy. And I was doing IT work. I did that for throughout my college career pretty much. And when I graduated, they're like, "Hey, we're going to hire you." So landed straight from my internship into a full-time job, basically fixing computers and loading software on them and doing all kinds of break fix stuff.
So you'd mentioned you didn't grow up in the United States then. You grew up overseas and then came here for undergrad.
That's right. That's right.
I got you. There's this whole chicken and the egg scenario, right? When you meet like fresh college grads, especially unfortunately, some they don't have the best internship experience. How do they get experience, like especially in the technical field, right? I was fortunate, so I have a mechanical engineering degree. And I remember I first started my first internship was actually not even an ME; it was in construction. And then I had a friend who helped me get a job in a medical device company where they did injection molded like parts. And I think that helped me. But a lot of times when I got into my own corporate like recruiting career, and Muslim kids would come to me and they would have like very little experience. They had experience with MSA, or they had experience with like the PASA, like Pakistani American Student Association, etc. These cultural groups, and not a lot of internship experience because maybe they were going overseas or maybe they're international students. What's the key for them to, if they don't have an internship, to my opinion, it's very challenging for them to get that first job.
Yeah.
If they're in that situation, what kind of advice would you have for them?
I mean, let's go back one step and say you really should work hard to get an internship, because
Right.
I do
Okay.
feel that your chances of getting a job go up, I don't know how many times. There's a massive difference when I'm looking to hire a fresh college grad
Yep.
between the person who got an internship or a person who didn't get the internship, right? The one with the internship is a clear winner in almost every scenario. So really, I think people don't think about that enough when they're in college. They're just not in that mode yet, and they think when I graduate, I'll get the internship. But it's super, super important to get that internship. But if you don't, there are people that we hire. For example, even at SpaceX, we used to get 30,000 internship applications a year, and we'd hire 200 people from that pool. And what we look at is beyond just like internship is other experience that you bring to the table. So what are you doing in terms of extracurriculars outside of work? Is it related to your field? So if you're in aerospace engineering, are you playing with like wind tunnels and designing like helicopters or model rockets outside of the classroom? If you're in whatever field you're in, are you passionate about that enough to be in a club, to be in a project? Doesn't have to be a club. Are you working outside? Have you found people who have the same hobbies as you do? And are you engaging in productive work where you're making an impact? And so those things can really make a difference. And a lot of times you can also spin, like I've seen so many people spin like, hey, look, I know I don't have the internship, but I do work at my dad's motel, or I've done something at a Starbucks, and I've done something unique with that.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of opportunities. Like, it doesn't have to be specifically related to your field, a formal college internship, but showing that you've engaged in activities at school, engaged in activities outside of school, you've volunteered even for your masjid, Islamic center, whatever it is, like spin it all and make it and show the experience and the richness that you bring. And if you don't have that, be working on developing that, right? Do something. Don't just like go to school and classes and that's it. You must have something to show.
It's interesting. You're bringing back some memories, and I remember I delayed my own graduation to beef up my internship experience. And
Mm,
I remember telling a kid this. It was like 2011, and I was at the we had this like so I used to work in the steel industry before I moved over to pharma medical devices. Um, I mean, I did medical devices in college, but then worked in steel for 12 and a half years, and I was the chief recruiter for engineering for my company at Ohio State, where I went to undergrad. And we were hosting this event at the Electrical Engineering College. And this Bengali kid comes up to me because I'm Bangladeshi, and he's trying to make some small talk and stuff, and he's asking, and he's gonna. And unfortunately, this kid had like a terrible GPA and no experience, and he's about to graduate. And I told him, like, listen, if you can figure out a way, just stay in school another year and get that internship experience, you're graduating now with that GPA. And if the only thing you're done on your resume, your extracurriculars is you were the treasurer of the Bangladesh Student Association. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. It's not the best profile, so to speak, right? Um, and sometimes those people in my past life in the steel industry, you could start off by saying, "Oh, I'm going to work the midnight shift supervisor job that nobody wants to do," right?
mm, yeah.
And then you kind of are forced to get in your door. And the thing of it is, sometimes people who like approach college this very lackadaisical way, just going to hang out, then they get put into a really really hard job starting off, and it kind of breaks them because they're not
Yeah.
prepared for it. So I really appreciate what you said, and I never thought about that. I think that's the kind of feedback we got to give maybe at the high school level, right? Because I think when we were growing up, I feel like the American um, mindset. Now I don't know what kind of guidance you got from your parents, but I don't know that my parents understood what it took to like how to navigate college into a career. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So I think that kind of mentorship probably needs to start at high school level, so to speak. But at this
Yeah.
point in time, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I have so many people come to me who are a year or two graduated from college and have not yet found a job. And it's just so sad. I mean, it really breaks my heart. And I asked them, like, okay, so what major did you do? And it's like, oh, I did political science. It's like, okay, and what work do you want to do? I have no idea. Okay, so what did you have in mind when you went for political science? By the way, I'm not trying to pick on political science.
Sure.
It's just whatever major you have. What
Right.
did you have in mind? I had nothing. I just thought I'd get through college. It's like, wow, it's really late now to be trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up.
Mhm.
And so, yes, obviously, not everyone knows what they want to do in high school, right? And not everyone even knows what they want to do in the second year of college. But having some sort of a plan that leads to some sort of job, I think, is the advice that I give people. Is if you're going to be a physics major, fine, be a physics major. That's not a problem. But when people say that to me, I go, okay, you want to be a physics major? What do you plan to do with physics? Oh, I don't know. What are the different things you can do? Do you plan to do a master's? No, I don't. Okay, well, with a physics major, you're either going to become a teacher or a researcher. Either
Mhm.
one requires a master's degree. So if you're just planning to pursue a bachelor's, like, please don't do that, right? Find another major. But people aren't thinking about this. For some reason, there's no end in mind. It's just like, let me get through college. And so I'm always trying to advise people like early to say, just pick something you're excited about. I don't care what it is. It could be political science. And then you can decide that that's the field you want to pursue because you want to get into like international relations or you want to work for the UN someday, whatever it might be, but have some sort of a plan that leads to some sort of a job. And my kids aren't allowed to pick a major that doesn't lead to a job. Like whether you're a boy or a girl, it doesn't matter. Like pick a major and change your mind later. I don't care, but
Right.
at least have some sort of plan so you can get into the workforce, get some experience. Then you can, we're living in a time where you can have multiple careers. Like this is not the time of our parents anymore, right? Like our parents would, or and especially our grandparents, they might do a job and they might be in that job for their entire life. And then our parents were more like maybe they work for two companies or three companies in their whole life. We're
Right.
living in a time where not only do people change jobs every 2 years,
Yeah.
people are changing careers like every 15 to 25 years.
Hmm.
Like all of us, you go, you're doing like teaching work, and the next thing you know, you're like working in the security industry, and the next thing you know, you're working in the finance industry. Completely change. So we're living in this very beautiful time where you can like get your career wrong and still
Right.
change it, but start with something in mind, right?
Right. Exactly. At the time of you when you were going to college, where were you at with your like Islamic studies? Is that something you had already started pursuing?
No. My Islamic studies came very late in my life. And
Okay.
so if you had asked me in college or even after college that I would end up pursuing studies at such a level as I did, I would not have imagined that. That happened much, much later in life. So I was kind of focused on my secular
Okay.
career at the time.
I
Yeah.
got you. Now, when you I find it very, first of all, I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on because you were a VP at SpaceX, and it's very rare to find practicing Muslims who have achieved like executive level success, right? In my opinion, from what I've seen at least, because I feel like there's a certain mentality with work that we sometimes approach things. It's more like a paycheck, or you have everybody and their mom's like an IT field where there's a programmer and they're
Yeah.
happy being a database admin and they make good money, right? So it's not because they're well compensated, but you never hear them talk about like climbing the corporate ladder, so to speak. And the only times you really see Muslims who have done that are almost they're semi practicing, if at all practicing, so to speak. But where did you like map out your career, or was this something that you aspired to at an early age to move into like upper management, or is that something that's kind of like naturally just happened?
Yeah, to be very honest, I think like I've never been ambitious in terms of career itself. Like I did not look at career progression as a goal. It wasn't like I
Okay.
started off with let me start here, then
Mhm.
I'll take the next step and the step after, and so on. But what I did believe in strongly was like I don't understand. Like you're talking about people's approach to career, right? Or let's just start with the job.
Yeah.
Most people you talk to, and this is not like a Muslim thing, right? It's a Muslim, non-Muslim, everybody. Most people you talk to hate their jobs, right?
That's
Is
facts.
that what you found, right? I mean,
Yeah.
almost everybody is just like, oh, I'm excited. Thank God it's Friday. I'm excited for the weekend. Can't wait to go out drinking for the non-Muslims and
Yeah.
can't wait to spend, time doing something else for the Muslims, whatever it might be.
Right.
But people don't like their jobs. And I'm just flabbergasted by that. Like I could not live like that personally. And alhamdulillah, like I've never had to deal with something like that because we have 24 hours in a day. We're sleeping, let's say 8. That leaves
I
16,
heard you
right?
sleep like 4, by the way.
We should talk about that. We should talk about that. There's times
we
where I
keep
sleep more for sure.
we'll table that. I want to get in that later.
Okay. So let's say the average person like
Yeah.
sleeps 8 hours a day, right?
Right.
And so you're left with 16. And of that, nowadays your job, your career, like commute time, et cetera, included, requires like at least 8 to 10 hours, right? So that leaves you with, so you're spending most of your waking day in your job at your career. If you don't enjoy this, isn't that going to reflect on everything else? Like you're not going to be a happy person. You're not going to feel intrinsically like, oh my God, I'm working on something cool, something fun. You're not going to come home smiling to your family. It's got to affect the rest of your life. And so I can't imagine someone like not liking their job. And I strongly advise people that they need to be excited and interested and passionate about their job. And that's the way I've been. So I've always tried to find work which gets me excited. Wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, I want to do this. And it bothers me that people don't. So anyway, getting back to like my way of like looking at my job and my career, I've always tried to number one, find work that I'm excited about. And number two, try to excel in that work. Because if you're and that's a lot easier when you're excited about something, right? You have the motivation to develop the competency. You're not fighting yourself like, I want to be good at this. Yeah, but I hate this thing. So I've just tried to do that. And then alhamdulillah, what's happened is generally speaking, with a couple of minor exceptions, generally speaking, if I've worked on something with that in mind, then it's resulted in some sort of promotion. And so every time I got comfortable, hey, I'm really like enjoying what I'm doing, everything's good, everything's happy, a manager's come and like tap me on the shoulder and be like, hey, I actually need you to do something else now. And so it's led to like the next step. And then like, okay, great, I'm uncomfortable, I don't understand it, but hey, let me see how we can excel in this role. And then, year and a half later, manager comes tapping on the shoulder again. And so that's kind of how my career's generally worked. with a couple of minor exceptions where I've actually asked for more work.
Okay.
But it really hasn't been like planned out. It's just more sort of happened to me, alhamdulillah. And this is, du'as of parents and blessing of Allah and all of that. But that's how it's been.
They say that, like, there's a school of thought out there that says career success is predicated upon two things: results and relationships. Right? It seems like you explained the results side of things pretty well. Like you found work you're passionate about. Obviously, if you're passionate about something, you're going to do it well, and that'll give you results. How do you manage like the relationships? Or some people who are cynics would call it like politics or playing politics. And you know how you probably work with people who have said like, oh, people only become VPs when they stab people in the back, right?
Yeah.
like can you elaborate a little bit about that part of your career, the relationship management, and like, because they say like it's not what you know but who you know and all that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly knowing people helps, right? And so building relationships is important. But the way that I look at it is, when you're excited about a particular job, like how do you get really good at your job? It's not something like just purely technical. When I use the word technical, I'm not just talking about like IT or engineering or something like that. I'm talking about like, let's say you're an accountant. Being technical means you understand, if you're a tax accounting person, you understand your tax law like super well. And if you're a cost accounting person, that you understand, standard cost, actual cost, all this stuff like super well. You understand how it works in the business, how it works theoretically and how it's applied. So you can apply this to any field, right? And so the way I've always looked at it is, how do I get really good at my job? It's not just understanding something in depth. It's also understanding how it fits into the whole system. So what is the role of a specific technology? So I've always like run IT and security. Those are the two areas that I've run. And like you mentioned, I was the VP of IT and security. I worked at Spacex for 9 years. And currently I'm the CIO at a new company, again, responsible for IT and security. And I'm not just always looking at, so I do like to go into in depth, like, okay, how did like packets move in a network, and how do bytes get evaluated by the processor and things like that, right? But at the same time, like, what's the role of IT in the company? What is it trying to do? So who is it trying to serve? Who are the customers? And I go spend time with the customers. What do you want from IT? What do you want from security? What do you expect? What would make you successful? I go spend time with the people who are working on it. It's like, what would make you happy? I go spend time with the leadership to understand what success looks like in their eyes, right? And trying to understand, like, build a system. Like, where do you fit in a system? So what is the system that you're part of, and what is your role in that? And as a part of that, you have to build the relationships, and you have to understand, what do all of your, to use like a big word, like stakeholders, what do they want? Right. And if you can understand that, it's like customer service in a business, right? Like if you can figure out what your customers want and give it to them, they're going to come back to you, and they're going to pay you for that. You're going to get profit. So building relationships is something that I didn't learn very early. Actually, I guess now it's been early, but it took me a few years, and I didn't realize it. I didn't realize I was actually like upsetting my peers sometimes with certain decisions that I was making. And I didn't realize the importance of working with them to build those relationships until I did this like 360 review process. And then I got this review back that my employees love me, my manager loves me, but my peers just hate me. And like, wow, what's going on? And why do they hate me so much? And then I decided to go talk to them, spend time with them. And they're just like, you're just doing your own thing. You're like moving forward with like what the boss wants. You're moving forward with what your employees want. You're doing good things for the business, but you never give me attention. And so I realized the importance of, ethically, Islamically, we're supposed to build these relationships.
Sure.
And so I focused on that. And I think that makes a big difference. And I counter to what the narrative might be, I really think it's an excuse. Now, there are companies where backstabbing is popular. I'm not going to deny that. There's certain cultures where that's the case.
Right.
But in most companies, or maybe in many companies, it's meritocracy. You do well, and they will reward you, whether that reward is a title change, whether that's more money, whether that's giving you some other benefits or promotion, whatever it might be. But I strongly believe that if you do well, you will get that reward. And I feel like people don't want to do well. Maybe we should talk about that. Like, why are people not focused on this aspect?
Yeah.
And then they want to blame others. And I see this even in companies which are meritocracies. People aren't doing well, and they're like, I'm not getting promoted, this is not happening. And they have the sense of entitlement without actually doing something about it. So I believe that doing well in a company, most companies, people will recognize that and reward that. And that's how that's I don't think it's a backstabbing culture, naturally speaking, like generally speaking.
You talk about customers, as an engineer, one thing I struggle with a ton is, because I'm kind of that similar role where I support manufacturing, right? Manufacturing is my customer. Um, and the thing that always like, and it's like the challenge that affects us as myself as an engineer, or like my other co-engineers, is that you have asks from certain groups that you're like, that's just absurd. And
Yep.
sometimes you try to explain it to them and they don't get it, or they don't like the answer. And it's like in your head, you're like, well, that's because you don't have a freaking engineering degree. So let me kind of stay in my. So I think that's always been a struggle for me personally. How do you navigate something like that where um the person has a certain thing in their mind, um and they're not willing to let that go, and you've got to kind of convince them, or I don't even know if you try to convince them. Like, what's the approach? Did that make sense to you?
Make total sense. So people come in with these ridiculous, they don't come in, so people don't come in with requirements, they come in with solutions, right? And they come in and they tell you like, this is what I need. And you're thinking like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? And this
Right.
happens in any like engineering field, whether it's mechanical
Yep.
engineering or electrical or whatever.
Right.
And I think the way to deal with that is the same way that you would deal with like your kids, the same way you would deal with your colleagues, like the same way you would deal with like a counseling patient is number one to like seek to understand before being understood. And sometimes when you just acknowledge and validate people, it diffuses them. It makes a big difference. So if instead of saying like that's absurd, that doesn't make any sense, like you can't even technically do that. This isn't going to scale. This is too expensive. It's complex. Like this is wrong. You can start with like, can you please help me understand what you're trying to do? Like, and then take a step back and just listen. People love to talk, right? So just listen and help and let them talk about this is my job. Here's how I do things. Ask a lot of questions. Okay, so then do you do this? You do that? Okay, well, how does this work? How does that work? Right? And they're loving it because they know that you're paying attention to them. And this is not like maliciously like you're trying to manipulate them. Like actually try and seek and understand what their requirements are. Like try and figure out what they're trying to do because maybe the solution that even you have in mind is not the right solutions. And I found that to be the case. I'm like, no, this isn't what you need. You need this other thing. But then when you talk to them, you realize actually there's a third thing that might be the solution, or there's some compromise solution or something else. So number one, listen, try and understand and put yourself in their shoes, give them the empathy, give them acknowledgement, validate them. It's like, okay, so let me see if I understood you correctly. If I can summarize what you just said, you're trying to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And the way you believe we should do this is A, B, and C. Now they're feeling so good because you've heard them, you've reflectively told them what you've heard, all of this good stuff. Now you've got them on your side, right? And you can say, look, I had another idea as well. What if we did it this way? And let's talk about the pros and cons of this, right? And now you've like converted them over to your side. And that's what I've generally found to be the case is in the end, people just want their problem solved.
Right.
And sometimes they might come in frustrated because you haven't solved it yet, right? And they think they have the solution and they think they know how to do your job, or they're just like, this is so simple. I just solve it this way. It's like, no, you don't understand the broader implications of that. So I think listening to people, working with them to show them you've heard them, and then collaborating with them on a solution, it requires some level of patience. And I know I have very little patience, but like I've tried to work on it.
Mm.
And in the end, like you actually end up feeling good. Like you've shown empathy to a person. You've heard them out and you've explained to them where you're coming from, and usually results in better solutions because you also understand their requirements better now. So you're going to do a better job of creating a solution for them. So I think this applies, like this is not something engineering specific, but
Yeah.
everyone has a customer. Every
Right.
business has a customer. Every business function has a customer. It doesn't matter if you're in sales, engineering, HR, finance, accounting, it really doesn't matter, right? And I think this approach is one that has been effective for me personally and one that I coach my team on as well.
Yeah, and that's an important point because sometimes I might have a certain mindset where I'll hear it out, but the guys that work for me, they'll like just burn the bridge. They'll be like, "You're an idiot. Why the hell would you do that?" You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you're like back to square one. That relationship you built is destroyed because someone in your team destroyed it,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
to speak. And then you got to go back there. You had touched upon something just a bit ago about like people don't want to do well. It's interesting. I've actually never heard it said like that.
Yeah. So sometimes it's an intentional thing and sometimes it's an unintentional thing. So I think it's a combination of factors, right? We live in unprecedented times and we're just connected all the time. So we're always on our smartphone, we're always being bombarded with notifications and social media. And I know you've talked about deep work and digital minimalism and so on,
Sure.
but really like we're living in this time where it's hard to enjoy anything because we're used to these dopamine hits that we get from from whatever social media and notifications, right? And so work is just a part of that. I think we have this sort of lazy, or we don't enjoy or like work type of attitude. That's one piece of it. Another piece of it is sometimes we just have like a wrong view about money, or about this life, right? Because as Muslims, we believe we have this life and we have the akhirah. And people focus in on, for example, like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, "Inna likulli ummatin fitna, wa fitnatu ummati al-mal." That every ummah has some sort of a test, trial, tribulation, and the tribulation for the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or us Muslims, is money. And so people have this mindset of, oh, okay, so accumulation of money is bad. Well, accumulation of money for no need is bad, right? But money in itself is not something evil. Like the Prophet ﷺ also said, "Ma taraktu ba'di fitna adarra ala rijali min an-nisa," right? That I did not leave a fitna greater for my people, that is greater than women. And so does that mean you like avoid women? Like don't get married? Fitna doesn't mean avoid the thing, right? Fitna means it's a test. And so we have to be very careful in passing that test. So earning money or making money is not harmful in and of itself. If you have a good objective in mind, I want to do this to support my family. I want to do this so that I can be, I can be, I can be in a position of not having to worry about money, so I can pursue other passions. I want to earn money so I can give charity. I want to earn money for my retirement. Nothing wrong with that, right? And so people just don't have this right mindset, and they bring in this idea of like amongst the Sahaba there was Abu Dhar, and Abu Dhar was someone who lived a life of zuhud, and he stayed away from money, and he believed in giving everything away. So we should follow the example of Abu Dhar. Well, why don't we follow the example of Abdurrahman bin Auf? The Sahaba were diverse people. Abdurrahman bin Auf was one of the 10 guaranteed Jannah. And at the same time, he was a multi-billionaire in his time. So you can have money and be guaranteed Jannah, right? So the Sahaba are very diverse people, but we have this like mindset of maybe money's evil. Or sometimes we have this mindset of we shouldn't worry about career. And I get this question a lot from youth nowadays, especially from my students. They'll come in and ask this question, Sheikh, like, I have this option of, I've done a computer science degree. I have this option of working for like Amazon, or I can just like give all of that up and go study Islam. And I think I want to go study Islam. And then I asked them like, okay, but because I have this mindset of like studying Islam is somehow like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this job at Amazon is like the wrong thing to do. Like you're not being akhirah focused enough or something like that. And I start digging into that. It's okay, so you want to study Islam? Great, nothing wrong with studying Islam. That's fantastic. Although it seems to have become a fashion, maybe more than like a means to an objective or an end. So I asked him like, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to become imam, scholars? Like, I don't really know. I don't have like an end in mind. I just thought it's good to study Islam. And so we keep forgetting that like Allah taught us in the Quran, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً, right? That ask for the best in this world and ask for the best in the hereafter. And so somehow there's this mindset of career is not like a good thing, it's like an evil thing, or it's going to distract you from the akhirah. That's another issue. So there's the distractions, then there's the the dopamine issues with the not being able to focus and enjoy some things. You don't enjoy your career, so you don't value it, or you think that the career is something wrong to pursue in Islam. But we forget that Allah teaches us in the hadith of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay," that Allah has prescribed ihsan, or excellence, in everything, right? And so when we're working, we should be pursuing excellent. We should be becoming excellent leaders, excellent people at our job, earning money in excellent ways. And we can have that passion. We can be good at this, and we should be good at this. Everything we do, we should do it with passion and the best of our ability. And for some reason, like there's less focus on that. So I think those are maybe some of the reasons that I've observed personally. But people don't seem to focus, and I've noticed like a decline in that trend, where people are even less concerned about their careers and their jobs, but at the same time they're feeling more entitled. Like, I'm not that focused on my job, but I should still get a promotion. So it's kind of in the wrong way.
There's this idea. This is across the board. It's not like a Muslim thing, right? But
yeah.
Have you ever seen Office Space?
I have, yeah.
So an Office, but that's a prevailing mindset that like, I'm just gonna go to work and stick it to the man. Meaning I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just like gonna clock in. I used to have this coworker, maybe like a decade ago, right? He used to like show up at like 9. I mean, most people start at 7:30, like 9:30, and leave by 2, and half his day would be spending like using Pro E, like engineering software, to like print out landscaping for his house. And he was like, sticking it to the man. But like that's like a prevailing idea. And I wonder how much of it is related to like, so you've got a lot of I would say dislike or hatred towards certain execs. Like you mentioned Amazon, right? Like people out there who were like, Jeff Bezos is a scumbag, or they don't, or when if you go back to Jack Welch's time at GE, you know, they didn't like him, or Zuckerberg, they work for Meta, and they feel like if they're there, like generally most people who work for these companies aren't going to have this mindset, but people on the outside are always like, probably, I'm sure you had it too. Hey, Sheikh Umer, how could you work for a guy like Elon Musk, so to speak, right? I mean, like at the end of the day, like, so to me, it's just like, I've never understood that. I mean, I used to work for a company called ArcelorMittal. The Lakshmi Mittal was like the third richest man in the world. It's Indian dude. He was a steel tycoon, right? I'm sure there were things I never delved into it. I guess the way I approached it was like, well, I have a contract with this company to do something, and that's what I got to do, right? If I'm going to get a pay, it's not to go in to screw off and like take their money, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great attitude. Like, I don't know if it's like jealousy of the rich people, or like, you know, some of these people, like maybe they don't have the best of character, and Elon seems to be getting a bad name nowadays. I just had an argument with someone last night, or like, Elon's a jerk. He expects people to sleep at work. I'm like, no, he doesn't expect people to sleep at work. He sleeps at work. Don't like, you know, extend the facts. And because interestingly enough, if you look at the approval ratings of Elon at companies like Tesla or SpaceX, very high approval ratings. Like people love him, and like and they enjoy working for him. And I worked for him for 9 years, so I know this well. But yeah, I don't.
Was he your N+1?
Yeah.
So he was he was directly your boss. Like
yeah. So yeah, the way it works at SpaceX is we also have a COO. Her name is Gwen Shotwell.
Okay.
And on a day-to-day basis, Gwen's running the show, but the strategic, you know, where the business is going or where engineering is going, all the decisions are kind of made by Elon.
Right.
So we call them mom and dad. Like mom is Gwen and dad is Elon. And so sometimes you go to mom for permission for something. She goes, you got to go talk to dad. So that's how it worked. But yeah, we worked very closely with Elon. But you know, I think I really like the way you said it. Like in the end, it's a contract. Like honor your contracts, and that's not just the written contract, like literally like the thing that you sign where, like, you know, it's the contract with your landlord only. It's your marriage contract, it's your employment contract, it's your implicit contract, it's your contract with Allah, the covenant that you took to worship Allah before we were born, right? The mithaq and so on. So for some reason people, you know, I don't know why, I don't know who they're trying to stick it to.
Right.
Like they're sticking it to themselves ultimately. It's like, I'll show them. It's like, what are you showing them? Like Bezos is still like the second richest man in the world or whatever, right? So what did you show him? Right? You're only just hurting yourself. I don't understand that attitude. Like fix it and become the next Bezos if and do it with akhlaq, and the things you don't like, show people that it can be done with akhlaq, right?
If there's like one thing that you learned from Elon in the 9 years, a thing that like I guess the biggest thing you learned from him, if you could quantify it that way, what would that be?
I keep saying the same thing. I mean, I've learned a lot from him, but maybe the biggest things that I've learned are, number one, first principles thinking. And I know he keeps talking about that, and people are like, well, what is first principles thinking? So first principles thinking, and interestingly enough, like the same thing that I learned from Elon is the same thing that I've learned from my Islamic studies teachers, by the way. What I've learned from Sheikh Akram, Sheikh Uthman, Sheikh Yasser, etc., I would say that's also first principles thinking. But anyway, I diverge. But first principles thinking is where you don't compare things. You don't always use analogies. You don't say this happened and this happened and this happened. Like you don't keep connecting things and build them one upon the other. You start from scratch. And so what you do is you say, okay, we need to perform a task. I'll give you an example. We need to build a thing. And the way we currently build it is very expensive. Like we start with raw materials, and then we end up, in the end, when we build, it ends up being very, very expensive. So how can we build it in a way that is not expensive? So Elon calls it, like, think about it like a magic wand. So if you're building, let's say, I don't know, a rocket part, right? Like a rocket fairing that holds the satellite. We found out at SpaceX that if we start with the raw materials and then look at the final cost of the fairing, it was, I don't want to give the number, but it was many, many, many times the cost of the raw materials. And Elon said, what if I was just to wave a magic wand and the materials automatically became the fairing? What would the cost be? The cost would just be the cost of the raw materials. So you need to try to get the cost as low as possible to that. So start from scratch and say, what are all the different ways I can get a fairing out of these raw materials? Can I change the raw materials? Can I produce them a different way? Can I use different people? Where can I use robots? Where can I do this? Don't look at what other people are doing in the industry, because that's the natural way that we operate in most companies. You look at what the best are doing. The best are doing this. Let's copy paste that, right? How often do we do that? And he taught us, no, don't look at what others are doing. Look at it from scratch. The only constraints are the laws of physics, the laws of science, right? And then build upon that and throw out all of your requirements. Like, oh, we must do this because that's how the industry does it. This is the best practice. Throw it all out. Throw out all requirements. Throw out all assumptions. Start with a blank slate and start thinking from scratch. If you didn't know what anyone else was doing, what would you do? And I think that's probably the number one thing that I learned from him.
Mm-hmm.
And question, it's very hard because we have assumptions in everything that we do that we don't even realize. Like, and this is what I mean about like even like Islamic studies, and this is what Shaykh Hakram taught me, is when you go to the Quran, a lot of times we've already studied some Islam. We already know, like, okay, this is how we pray, this is how we do this is what we learn from our teacher. So we go to the Quran and we assume what we've learned is true, and that's how we read the Quran. Versus looking at the Quran with a completely blank mind. Pretend like you know nothing, and Allah's just, if you're reading Allah's words, what do you get out of that? And you get a very different message.
I got you. I want to move into the Islamic studies side a little bit, but wrap up the career kind of stuff for now. Is there's this trend that I've observed, especially with COVID, this whole, like, you talk about entitlement. And it seems like, in my perspective, that a lot, I don't work, I'm not a remote worker. I don't like remote work. I like going to the office. Now you're in IT, you were in IT. A lot of IT folks are remote workers. I have some friends now who are in IT who have like multiple, like they have 2 remote jobs that don't know about each other because they can manage it that way, right? To me, I feel like that remote work bubble is like gonna implode if it hasn't already imploded, because I see all these layoffs coming now in tech, and there's this entitlement though that even people who are laid off from remote jobs, they're like, oh, I only take another remote job, so to speak. So could you talk a little bit about, I want to get your perspective on remote work. I understand some people are more, they say there's studies out there to say some people are more productive remote. But like from your experience, what have you seen, and like, what do you think the future of remote work lies?
Yeah. I mean, I've lived, or as we went through this transition over the last 9 years when I was at SpaceX, I generally was not working remotely. In fact, I was pretty much never working remotely. I was going into work 5 days a week. And that's just the culture of the company. And Elon believes in that. And then the last like 2+ years, I was working remotely as a part of COVID. And so everybody was kind of working remote. And so I've experienced kind of both sides. I would say I didn't used to appreciate how much it matters going into work until I worked at a company where everybody goes into work and things move really fast, and you just work with like the couple of colleagues around you and you quickly make decisions and you just move forward. So I think the level of collaboration that you have in collaborative roles, it certainly makes sense to go into work. So whether that's a day a week, 2 days a week, 4 days a week, depending on the level of collaboration required between teams, I absolutely do believe it. And yeah, I work in IT, I work in technology, and I enable this technology. I believe there's nothing like being in person to establish collaboration. And nothing absolutely beats it. Now, individual work, when it comes to maybe you're working on a programming task or doing something that just requires your own attention, doing deep work with flow and all of that, maybe there's less distractions at work. And I think everybody kind of knows, do you work well at work or do you work well at home? And some people, like, I actually like going into work. I find that I focus better. But I think some people do work better at home, and that's totally fine. But the problem is there's people who know they work better at work and they kind of slack off at home, yet they want that remote job. And then, like, case in point, those people who are doing those 2 jobs, and like, it's like, come on, man, like, that's not even ethical. You're working for 2 companies, earning 2 paychecks and not telling one about the other, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is exactly why people are getting called into work. So I do think we've gone from like everybody must come into work to this other extreme of Now most companies are allowing remote work because they've been losing workers if they don't allow remote work. But then now we have these layoffs, so maybe there'll be more supply. I think there's going to be there's swinging of the pendulum going on, and there will be some balance, and hopefully we'll figure that out. Because right now, I do believe, and I'll make a controversial statement, that many companies are suffering from a lack of productivity. And you can see this. You can see like the Google CEO, he's like, hey, we need to step up our productivity by 20%. And I know this because I have so many friends at Google, not to pick on Google, but like I have friends at Google who are like, yeah, we work like 35 hours a week, 30 hours a week, we kind of chill, like things are cool. I work remote, but I don't work that hard. Like I don't need to, it's not like that anymore. And then Amazon seems to be a mix. Like half the people are doing that. The other half aren't. Some people are working like 60-hour weeks. Some are working like 30-hour weeks. And Twitter, again, controversial, but like all my friends all the friends that I've had at Twitter over the years, they're like, yeah, we got really fat. we did need to have like a really big layoff. And so there's this level of like people are not working as hard as they should be. And I'm sure you've read about quiet quitting and this whole trend about
Cal Newport talks about that.
Yeah, so it's just like a whole trend now where people are like, yeah, I'm not going to quit, but I'm not going to work that hard. But like, you got to be careful with that. Are you being ethical, right? Every penny that we earn better be halal. So I get really worried about this stuff. Is like, as Muslims, we need to be super careful with these trends. Make sure we're putting in, like you said, honor the contract that you have. Like otherwise the money you're earning is not halal. We're so particular about the meat that we eat, like the chicken, the beef, like it has to be slaughtered, hand slaughter, machine slaughter, HACCP certified, all this stuff. But when it comes to work, it's like, you take a 20-minute break and you just don't even feel guilty about it. What's up with that, right? Earning halal is where it starts. Spending halal and slaughtering halal, that's like the next step. But like earning halal is where it starts. But for some reason, that's not something talked about a lot.
Well, it really got rubbed in my face last year in Ramadan, right? Because I was going to the office, and usually what I do is in Ramadan, I had to take time off near the end of the month, last 5 days or so, right? So I have friends like, yo, I was at Taraweeh and I was asleep till 10 and I had to just wake up for a meeting, right? And then some of those same people got laid off, right? So it's like, any surprise? And so you wonder. I don't know how my friends who are in IT or tech work, so to speak. And my brother is in tech sales, and I always like get on it. Now I think he has a quota. With sales, you have like actual numbers. So it's hard to like just screw off there but if you're just like a database admin or something of that sort, I just feel like that's something that can be a slippery slope. So Islamic studies, when
sorry,
did that come? Sorry, go ahead.
I know we're going to Islamic studies. Just a quick note.
Sure.
I think because a lot of people have asked me this question, so it'd be good to talk about is what is the contract with your work? And this is something that I've encouraged people to talk to their managers about. Do they expect you to work like 40 hours a week or 45 or 50 hours a week? Okay, that's one kind of contract. Then you have to honor that. You can't just say, I've done my work. They expect you to work a certain number of hours. Or is the contract such that they expect you to do a certain amount of work? And I love those. Because if they expect you to do a certain amount of work, you can clear this with your manager. Do you care how many hours a week I work? And if they don't, just get the work done. So then you can sleep until 10 a.m. It's not a problem, right? But just make sure you have that right contract with your manager. And so many people have negotiated with their managers to just deliver a certain amount. And that's great. Then you can do whatever you want. Work 20 hours a week. I don't really care. You're honoring your contract, right? At that point.
Is that a thing? Like first I'm hearing about it. I used to have a division in my last company. Like my division manager we'd get something done and we'd make the process more efficient. And he'd be like, okay, now you got more time to do more work, to do something else. Right.
Yeah. It varies from job to job. Like at an executive level that you don't have this option of like, let me just deliver a certain amount. You own a thing. So everything to do with that thing you own, you have to deliver.
Right.
But in many jobs, you'd be surprised, especially in like software development or even like a database admin. Like your manager might just be like, hey, you know what? I just need you to like do your job. And like, if nobody complains, I'm happy. Like, okay, cool. I'll do. So some weeks, I'll work 50 hours. Some weeks I'll work 30 hours. So whatever you have to work that out with your manager. Right. But the contract is not necessarily hours and the contract is not necessarily output. You have to work out with your manager what they expect. And don't be like, and that way you're clean, right? Like you just want to be able to answer to Allah that you have done your job properly. Make sure you understand what the expectation is. You meet that expectation, not your expectation, but your manager's expectation.
Now, granted, would you I don't know that you give that same advice to somebody someone who's aspiring for career advancement and upper management isn't even thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think so. That caveat's there that if you're trying to advance, because you do have one of the people you talk about entitled people. I had a friend who interned with me. He was an intern. He actually was a full-time hire, but he was there for such a short time that you felt like an internship. And I remember helping him get a job there, and he quit in 3 months. And I was kind of like, but remember we go to lunch one time, and the plant GM, I think I mentioned his name one time. We had a meeting with him later. It's like, well, how do I get to his level? I'm like, well, for starters, you can't work 4 hours a day,
Yeah.
right? The plant G. So, but I think there's this idea that you can aspire to like this going back to entitlement. You can aspire to that and also like chill.
You can't chill, but you can, surprisingly, you
Okay.
can work a manageable number of hours
Okay.
and still fit in your work and still do extremely well and still get promoted. So how do you do that? And I think it starts with just being productive at work. Like people just don't go into work with the right attitude anymore. It's like, okay, you show up a few minutes late, you work for a bit, you chat with your colleagues, you talk about how the weekend was, how the baseball game went, and how Morocco's winning the World Cup and how that was not anticipated. You spend so much time talking about these things, and then like you take your coffee breaks and your lunch breaks, and I mean, of course you should take breaks. Like I'm not against breaks, but
Yeah.
the breaks just become longer,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just the breaks. Like the whole day you're like socializing so much,
Right.
and what do they call it, water cooler talk, right?
Yep.
And I mean, The Office is probably like a great example of this, right? But like for me, I'm just like, okay, I'm showing up to work. I don't want to be here. I mean, there are times where I've had to work many, many, many hours, but like my general goal is like I want to be as efficient as possible, because work is not my entire life. They say work-life balance. I don't like that term, work-life balance. I like to think of like everything balanced. There's like a pie chart, right? In that pie chart,
Yep.
you have your family, your religion, your finances, your work, your health, all this other stuff, friends, whatever is important to you, put in the pie chart. Work
Right.
is a slice of that pie chart.
Mm-hmm.
So if that slice is going to take too much, then I'm not going to be able to focus on other things, right? It's just how the numbers add up. You only have so many hours in a day. And so I try and be focused at work. And when I show up, I'm like, I'm deep in my work, and I'll use tricks, like I'll like wear headphones and I'm not listening to anything, but it sends the message of right now I'm in deep work. Do not disturb me, right? It sends a signal. And there are other times where I'll take it off because I want people to be able to approach me. But I think if we focus hard and exercise the productivity techniques that we've learned in other
Right.
aspects of our lives and self-development, you can be successful and not have to like work 12 hours a day. You don't have to.
Like, could you walk me through how a typical day looked like at SpaceX before COVID? Like when you went to the office, starting with like when your commute and all that. Because I think that's something we can take benefit from, especially in companies. Sometimes we get sucked into so many meetings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then or people live in their inbox. Can you talk like how would a day look like for you there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting distracted by your comment about inbox or meetings. Well, let's come back to that. So
Yeah.
my day sort of starts with my year. So every year I write down my goals. Like we're approaching the end of December, I'm going to be evaluating the goals for this year and creating goals for next year, right? And so
Yep.
part of that, like I've got like health, I've got finances, I've got family, I've got religion, I've got contribution to society, and so on. And one of the areas is job and career. So I'll write down some goals. Like I want to develop in this area, I want to get these certifications, or I want to get another degree, or whatever it is, and kind of like write that down. And then I actually send, like when I write my goals, I send my wife a monthly status report, how I'm doing. She doesn't ask for it, but I need someone to be accountable to, and I
Right.
enjoy like writing that, like this is how I'm doing against my goals. But really, like you have this like yearly, monthly thing, but it gets to weekly planning, but nightly planning. So in the book Eat, what's it called? Eat That Frog, I think the author talks about research, which says that it takes you 10 to 12 minutes to plan a day. 10 to 12 minutes to plan your day. But if you plan your day, because you've planned it, you save 100 to 120 minutes. That's 2 hours, right? If you're working 8 hours, that is 25% extra time that you've gained, which you can use towards whatever you like, whether it's work related or not. But planning the night before is where my workday starts. So I'll sit down, even if I'm like really tired, I'm like, I need to sit down and work on my to-do list and clean it up. So put the most important tasks at the top and say, these are the 2 or 3 things that are not negotiable that I have to get done. And I'd say that's like the start of the workday. And then getting a good night's sleep, right? Which isn't something I always focus on, but getting a good night's sleep, and then commuting to work, right? With like, usually multitasking is not a thing, but like commuting to work while you're reviewing your Quran is absolutely a thing. So you can multitask on things that don't require your full cognitive attention, right? But yeah, the workday for me is like starting with the most important tasks. Like, what have I decided are the most important things, and not waiting for motivations. Sheikh Akram always says, waiting for your motivation is such bad manners. He calls it bad manners. I always laugh when I hear that. It's like, you're going to wait for motivation? What kind of, what kind of manners is that? Like, that's not akhlaq. And I laughed until I like saw this TED talk as well that talked about like waiting for motivation is the silliest thing you can do, because motivation sometimes comes, it sometimes doesn't. And, you never know when it's going to be there. And yeah, you can try and work on it, but just get started, right? Get started on work. So my work days, like, I use the Pomodoro technique. So it's like work for 25 minutes or 55 minutes, depending on what it is, then take like a 5-10 minute break, then go do another Pomodoro. So all these Pomodoros add up, where you're just doing focused work for a few hours. And if I can get in like 4 hours of focused work, and the rest of the day might be meetings and interactions and communications, whatever, 4 hours of focused work is a heck of a lot. And I find that it's enough to move me forward, like way more than the average person. And it makes me feel pretty good.
Yeah. I think the challenge is,
I do take a nap in the middle of the day as well. So I generally like sneak out to my car, sleep for 25 minutes.
Okay.
And I do that as well. But that's my general like work day.
I do that in Ramadan only. Ramadan, I feel like that gives you that extra boost that you need. But like, and then I've tried to implement, because like Cal Newport talks about like building that deep work block, right? Yep. And they say you want to do it in the morning when you're fresh, and before you get distracted. And there's also this philosophy out there, which I've tried to implement, easier said than done, about like checking inbox 3 times a day, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but the problem is a lot of times, because people just tend to like send you an email, or the worst is like, you'll be at your desk working on something, and you accidentally left your calendar open for like a half hour, and it's like in an hour, and somebody will send you a meeting invite in like an hour for 30 minutes. And you're like, and usually with no context either. Right. You don't know what the meeting is about. So I try to sometimes block off my calendar for the whole week with stuff, just so it looks full, and people still try to will double book you and stuff, right? But like at SpaceX, I would assume the culture is probably like, my assumption from what I hear is that it's not super like, you're not going to be in a bunch of useless meetings all the time, right?
No, in fact, Elon's made it very clear. If you find yourself in a meeting in the first 2 minutes, like you don't know what you're doing there, just walk out of the meeting. Like, it's literally how it's done. So it's funny. Like, I've been in meetings and somebody will be like, I'm not sure what I'm doing at this meeting, I'm just walking out. They'll make it very clear. Like, I don't know why I was invited. Like, they want to prove a point. Like, why did you invite me to this meeting, you silly guy? Like, so they just walk out of the meeting. And I've done that personally too. It's like, I don't think I have anything to contribute here. And you'll just walk out. But I think it's harder, I think, when you're like a member of a team, but you could try and encourage it. But if you own a team, it's easier to encourage a culture where you say, don't send a meeting invite unless a meeting's needed, and make sure there's an agenda in there. Make sure what is it? Parkinson's law, where a meeting will always take as much time as you allocate for it.
Right.
So something could have been a 15-minute meeting. For some reason, we don't believe in 15-minute meetings. We only believe in like 30 or 60, right?
Yeah.
And so if you allocate 60 minutes, somehow that meeting ends up taking 60 minutes. Not 50, not 55, not 45. It'll always take 60 minutes. What's up with that? You go to the meeting, you're sitting there for an hour. It doesn't matter. But if you schedule 30 minutes, the meeting's going to end in 30 minutes. So it's weird how Parkinson's law works, right? And this is something I learned from Elon too, is he scheduled meetings in 5-minute blocks, 5-minute increments. So any meeting that I have with Elon is generally like 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long. And you're like, whoa, like, how does that work? It's like, no, you actually go in and you're very productive. It's 10, 15 minutes of focused conversation, back and forth, arguments, discussions, coaching, learning, teaching, whatever, all that happens. And you walk away with a decision, right? All of that happens in 10 to 15 minutes. So that's something I've tried to do, is like keep meetings like 15 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, have a clear agenda, send out materials in advance, train people to like try and read it. And it's not always like I'm having meetings with my teams. I'm having to coach other teams as well. It's like, come on, guys, like, let's have meetings where it makes sense. But yeah, you're right. Like, time blocking definitely works, right? There's two reasons you want to block your calendar. You want to block your calendar so that other people don't schedule meetings. Although working at SpaceX, it's nice. You just decline. I don't know what this meeting's about. And the second reason you want to time block is because if you don't have the things that you need to get done on a calendar, it's a little bit harder to like get them done. If you see a list, it's a little bit different than seeing it as a time block. In this half an hour, I'm going to do this. In this 1 hour, I'm going to do that. So there's multiple reasons you want to exercise that technique.
Are you concerned in your post SpaceX career that the culture won't be as, I know you're like a week out of it, right?
Yeah.
That you know, because like that you walk into a place because they always say a new guy, they won't adapt to you, you adapt to them. Yeah. So is that on your mind? And if you end up in a culture where people ping you on Slack or Teams and expect you to reply right away, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's things that you could do to establish your personal space and set up your own ground rules, right?
Right.
And the workplace, people tend to respect that because the thing is, if you're just making up rules and say, hey, don't talk to me from this time to this time, I won't respond to you in Slack, I only check it once every hour, I'll only check email twice a day, people can be like, who the hell are you, right? So that might work for an executive. It may not work for an individual contributor. But what happens is you got to build credibility. So if people see like you're coming into work, you're focused, you're delivering output, you're getting work done, you're always trying to improve things, and they see all of this like productivity and just like competence from you, then they'll be like, oh, this person always leaves at 5, but you know what, man, they deliver so much. It doesn't matter that they leave at 5 p.m. Or this person like is so rigid about their meetings.
Yeah.
But you know what? Well, that's okay because they deliver so much, and so people, it may not be contagious. Maybe it's contagious. Maybe people learn from that. You know, maybe people will approach you and they'll ask you, because people do approach the competent people, right? They'll
Right.
go to the more senior engineers, or they'll go to the more senior accountant or whatever, and be like, "How are you so productive? How do you do this so well?" So that might happen, but at the very least, they'll give you some respect, right? They'll cut you some slack, and you can get away with that if you have credibility. I don't think you can just start at a new company and be like, this is who I am. You got to take it or leave it.
Right.
I think you got to go build the credibility, and building credibility takes time. It takes 6 months, takes a year. Once you've built that, then you can be like, hey, look, these are my rules. Like, you know, let's, is it okay? Can we, and you can talk to people about it. So definitely can be done. Yeah, I am afraid of like landing at a company where it doesn't work like that. So I'm like super selective. Like before I chose the current company I'm working at, which I just started at, like you said, a week ago, I interviewed at many places, really sussed out the culture, right? Like asking the most senior to the most junior people, like how do decisions get made, and how do you figure out what work, how do you prioritize things, and what's important in this company, and how do people behave? So I really tried to like do the due diligence to figure out how a company works before I joined. Still, you could land up in the wrong place, but yeah.
I hear you. Yeah. It's funny because like I just on my Microsoft team, I don't know what kind of Microsoft Teams, you have your status, right? So I put myself offline, I think like 6 months ago. Now, one of my colleagues, she messaged me on Teams the other day. She's like, hey, are you online? Are you here? Are you online? You said you're offline since like 6 months. I'm like, well, I'm talking to you right now, aren't I? Right. And then she was like, yeah, good point. And then I was like, but I put that in, and my boss asked me about it because somebody reached out to him, was like, hey, Maheen's been out of the office for 6 months. And he's like, no, he's not. He's here right now. And so he forwarded the message. I was like, that's good. I set it up that way because I put an extra layer in. I'm like, it's just an extra layer that, listen, if you haven't even sent me, if you look at my team status and you saw I was offline and then stopped even trying to reach out to me, then it shows me that you really weren't you really didn't need me that bad.
Yeah.
Like you send me an email or something, right? If someone's offline, okay, someone's on vacation. Like I went on vacation. I was in Bangladesh for like 2.5 weeks. I still got email. I was like, I'll get when I get back, right? So it just sometimes you find these little things. And she was like, whoa, that shows you're unavailable. I'm like, it is what I mean. You reached out to me and I replied, so I'm available. It's just like you kind of like use some common sense sometimes. But I want to talk a little bit about your Islamic studies background. At what point did you like? I didn't catch if you were like consider yourself like practicing growing up, or were you someone that always like was practicing and then got into knowledge later? Like what was your, how would you describe yourself there?
Yeah, I would say I was practicing in terms of like, you know, praying 5 times a day, fasting, like doing the core pillars, and generally, you know, trying to be ethical and be good.
Yeah.
But knowledge wasn't like, seeking knowledge wasn't like my thing. And didn't become my thing until like 2003, maybe. Yeah, so it was like
Okay.
about 20 years ago, 19 years ago, something like that, when I went for Hajj and met Sheikh Zahid Rashid, who lives in New Jersey. Anyway, he was our group leader, and he was a very charming personality, and he's just like a really good guy, like really just nice, good character, but also very knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like very much about, hey, let's follow proper knowledge to do a really good Hajj, because I was at Hajj, and it's like, let's do this right. And so he just really influenced me, and he asked me some questions, like he's like, hey, do you know the 9 conditions of La ilaha illallah? And I'm like, there's 9 conditions.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know La ilaha illallah properly. What kind of Muslim am I? So I felt a little bit guilty, and that's when I sort of like began my journey of knowledge.
And then did you start with him, or like when you returned to the US, like, because back then, 03, that Al Maghrib was just starting back then, right? And that's
Yeah.
that was myself. That was my first introduction to any kind of like formal studying, so to speak.
Yeah.
But what was your when you came back to the US, and where did you start?
Yeah, it was, I would say there were like 4 phases. If I'm just thinking about this on the fly. There's the
Sure.
practicing phase, but
Yep.
not seeking knowledge.
Yep.
Then there's the, oh my God, like I don't know my 9 conditions, so I need to do some self-study, to eventually like going to classes at the masjid, and joining Al Maghrib and doing a whole bunch of Al Maghrib classes. And then like the final phase was like, okay, now I want to get like serious about this. I actually want to become a scholar. And that was the point of like memorizing Quran, learning Arabic, seeking an alamiya, and then becoming a mufti. So that's like the final phase, right? And I would say like, so coming back from Hajj, it was, oh my God, I don't know things. Let me find some books and just go read them. And it was self-study, self-study. Just I came back when I was a reader. So the first month I just read through like, I don't know, 8 books, and I just kept reading. And then I think it was like same year or year after, my wife was encouraging me, hey, let's go to the masjid, attend some classes. Al Maghrib's doing a weekend seminar, and I was like, whole weekend? I can't go for a whole weekend for a class. It's like losing my whole weekend. And then she's like, no, it's actually 2 weekends. It's like, oh no, 2 weekends. So I was
And this
very
is in
reluctant.
SoCal?
This is in SoCal. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it was the first Al Maghrib class. I don't know when that was. Was that 2005 or something? I don't know when it was, but
You're talking about the days of like Abdullah Zikria. Was that?
yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He was,
Abdullah
I
and
mean, yeah.
Muhammad Mana, I think, was a kid back then.
Yes, he was, and he was attending the first class. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the scene, and somehow my wife was like, "Yeah, let's just try it out." And I went to an Al Maghrib class, and I was like, "Oh
Mhm.
my God, I like this stuff."
Right.
So I became a Islamic studies nerd, and it started with like Al Maghrib learning in English, and then eventually it was more like, at that point it was more like, I just want to be a better Muslim, and
Right.
how do you do amal without ilm? One of the things that bothers me is like nowadays, like Islamic studies has become a fashion. And so I speak about this a lot. It's like, oh, let's go seek ilm, let's go seek ilm. Like, okay, why? What do you plan to do with it? I ask this
Right.
question a lot. And for me at the time, like it was just amal, right? It was like, let me learn some things so I can apply them. So that's what Al Maghrib was about. It was about me. How do I become a better Muslim? How do I not know these things? And after that, it was another phase of like, oh, I've worked on me, but I actually want to like study this formally, properly, comprehensively. I want to engage in Islamic scholarship. I want to teach this thing. I want to research in this area. I want to do so much more. And the only way to do that, of course, as people know, is like you have to study Arabic. You have to approach a formal program. And that was like kind of the final phase of like, okay, let me go like memorize Quran and study Arabic, and get on that journey.
How old were you when you like moved into that final phase, or recognized that's what you wanted to do?
I was 32. Yeah.
That's really eye opening, because I think a lot of I was having dessert with a friend of mine who's a student at Darul Qasim. Obviously Sheikh Amin
Yeah.
Koladia. He's been a student at Darul Qasim for years, and I remember I was telling him that next a couple months ago when you and I were talking about scheduling this podcast, and I was like, hey, I'm interviewing Sheikh Umer, and he was just like, Sheikh Umer is like the avatar that I'm trying to aspire to, because like my friend, he's a successful programmer at one of these big tech companies, but he's also doing the Islamic studies thing. But he's just like, that's what I'm trying to. And it's funny because my friend, he started studying at a much younger age. And I think that was my impression of yours. I thought you was something maybe you started like in high school or something. 32. That gives people a lot of hope. I think that's really inspiring because sometimes people think that like you start working and then it's like over.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the path I recommend. This is to be honest, like I would say I wasted a lot of my time early on, right? And it's not like I've always been productive, Mr. Productive. Like it's not like that at all, right? In the early years, I didn't know what I was doing. In college, I was bored, didn't know what to do. I was working. Working was like my way of like enjoying myself, but I was pretty bored. And so, but part of it is like dua of parents, right? Like my mom was making dua that I be a hafiz of Quran before I was born, before she conceived me. Like she's like, I want my children to be hufaz. And alhamdulillah, both myself and my sister became hufaz. And she would put me in every Quran program, like go study here, go study there, like as at the age of 8, at the age of 10, at the age of 12, at the age of 14, like never worked out. Like it just, I'd memorize a juz, I'd memorize juz and a half, 2 ajza, and that was it. Never worked out. So at 32, I just suddenly got this motivation of like, okay, I'm going to do something. And unlike my secular career, which I said just kind of happened, the religious studies side was very planned. It's like, okay, because fundamentally, I believe like learning Arabic and studying Quran are a means to an end as well, right? Like I do believe, by the way, I believe everyone should study Arabic if they can, because if you can connect with the words of the Creator,
right,
there's your direct message of Allah going. If you study it really well, right, you're getting the direct message of the Creator, not just in your mind but in your heart, because you now understand the native language in which the message was revealed, right? So everybody should study Arabic, but to become a scholar, you have to study Arabic. And so for me, this was a means. It was like, okay, I need to study Arabic. I need to study Quran because I want to pursue scholarship. And I'm 32. It's very late. I really need to do this quickly, fast, efficiently. I had a lot to like make up for because this realization happened very late in my life. And I don't think that's the ideal way. Like when you're younger, you have so much time, use that time. But to be married with kids while working at an intense company and trying to pursue scholarship is not the best idea. But maybe like I've just shown, and this is at least it's nothing to do with me. It's again du'as and blessing from Allah. But like it's an example of it can be done.
This was pre-SpaceX though, 32?
32. So I started memorizing Quran when I was working at Broadcom. At the time, I was working 55 hours a week, so it was pretty intense. And I finished when I was working at SpaceX. So I finished in the first year of SpaceX.
Did you do Quran and Arabic simultaneous, or did you do one after the other?
Quran and Arabic was so I started Quran, and then it was I think a year or two later that I started Arabic, but they ended somewhat simultaneously. Yeah.
Okay, so like, what would you? Because I feel like trying to learn Arabic for a lot of Western Muslims is like a real tall task. So myself, like I've shared this before publicly, right? I've done various institutes. Now, that friend that I mentioned to you earlier, that was like says you're his avatar. He actually gave me the advice to enroll in Studio Arabia, and I'll mention it publicly because I'm a student there right now, and I found that to be so far the most productive for me personally, because it's like one-on-one, right? In a sense. But like, what did you find? But I find most people struggle with Arabic because the way it's being taught is like super dry, or you're doing it, or you don't have the mental stamina to do it. For example, like I remember I would take with the institute, I would finish work at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and then have to go to class at 7 to 10. Your brain's already like fried.
Yeah.
For the workday, and then you're doing 3 hours at night of Arabic, and you're just like trying to stay awake.
Yeah. So I think it depends on what your goals are with the Arabic. And also, I think it depends, like, there's a variety of ways of teaching Arabic, and I think there's right and wrong ways, and I'm probably going to say some things that are controversial here. But But I think fundamentally, like, when I said everyone should learn Arabic, what I meant was, as children, if we can give our kids the gift of Arabic, because you have to learn a foreign language. Most people end up learning some sort of foreign language in high school anyway, right? Most people end up taking Spanish or French or something like that.
Right.
They do 4 years of it, 5 years of it, and then they forget it, right? You never use it for your life, or maybe you maintain it, but it's not super useful. So why not make that Arabic? And there's enough Arabic programs that work with high schools to say that you can get high school credit for it, and it counts. It looks good in college. It's wonderful. And now you've learned the language of the Quran. I say that as like, let's approach Quran so we can understand it directly without translation. It's nice if we can do that. If we haven't done that, and now we find that we are much older in the workforce, married with kids, and we have limited time, the question becomes, what do you want to learn Arabic for? If you want to learn Arabic to become a scholar, it's a very different path. Now you have to learn the nahu and the sarf and the balagha, and you have to, go through the conjugation tables and really understand like what's the difference between like maf'ul mutlaq and hal, and like really get into the nitty gritty technical science. But you may not be able to speak it. You're just learning it so that you can do tafsir of the Quran, so that you can approach books of hadith and tafsir and fiqh and aqidah and so on. It's a very different goal. If your goal is to connect with the Quran, maybe don't start with the grammar. Maybe start with a speaking conversation course. Is Studio Arabiya like Arabiya Baina Yadayk? Is that the general model they follow?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very different approach. And by the way, that's the approach we've taken with our kids, right? We work with them on conversational Arabic.
Right.
And through that, they've developed also technical Arabic skills, like grammar, nahwu, sarf, all of these other things. But instead of making it dry, let's make it fun, right? Let's start with conversation. Let's talk about how was your day? What did you do at work? Like, and I didn't appreciate this early on. I appreciated this later because I did take the Nahwu Sarf path, right? When you go study Arabic in Islamic Studies Institute, you study it very technically. So I didn't learn how to speak. I learned how to read. I learned how to basically understand and comprehend. Like, give me a book of fiqh and aqidah hadith. I'm like, yeah, I can understand those books that are in the back shelf over there. But I wasn't able to speak very well. And later I decided, you know what, that's still not helping me with the Quran enough. So I learned how to speak. But I feel like the curriculum, like, how do we learn how to speak English? Or Urdu or Bengali or whatever. As a baby,
Yeah,
your parents are speaking to you, and then suddenly you just start speaking. You don't know that this is a noun and this is a verb, and this is a dangling participle and a gerund, and you don't learn grammar. You just learn how to speak. So I do believe the proper way to learn Arabic, firstly, initially, is just to speak. And I think that's the general style of a lot of the institutes nowadays. Like I think Studio Arabiya works like that.
They have different programs, but they're classical Arabic programs like that. For me, it was like my oldest daughter, who's like now 9. So alhamdulillah, where we live in Chicago, we're like Little Palestine, right? So the girls, before they started like full-time, well, they're in full-time Islamic school, but their pre-K program here is Arabic immersion for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So my daughter, my oldest, now the younger two haven't done as much. My oldest would come home just spouting off Arabic like all day at home, and we were lost. And I remember, the only thing I could remember her saying was like "bidik fi hamam," like that was the only thing I picked up on, right? And then I was like, okay, well, maybe the next kid will help. And then when she went to the regular school, it's English medium, English immersion. There's still Arabic, but she's losing a lot of it because she's not getting like the practice at home. I figured, my next kid, when she goes there, they'll reconnect. But ultimately, it was like I went to Morocco right before the pandemic, and I got to meet some mashayikh there in Fez and in Meknes out there, right? And I needed a translator, and it was just like I was just like feel like lacking of not being able to conversate directly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's where it was like. To me, it's like, I don't, like, me personally, I don't have aspirations of scholarship, but it's almost like I've always had this thing where like the reverence of ulama, and then like the benefit from them and listen to their tapes. I remember like I had a friend of mine used to always listen to the tapes of like Shaykh Al-Albani back in the day, and he used to like he was a Somali brother that I went to undergrad with, and I was like, well, I'm just making a translation, for example, right? But he was listening to tapes directly and whatnot. But I kind of wanted to that's kind of the motivate. Wrapping up here, how did you get plugged in with Sheikh Akram? You mentioned him a couple times in passing, and we met essentially because of him back in Chicago. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you look hard enough, I guess Allah guides you. And I had decided that I want to pursue Islamic knowledge, but I was still on like my Quran and Arabic journey when I met him.
Right.
And what happened was he came to California for a week, and I had never heard of him before. And he was here, and I wasn't really planning to attend his classes. But then one of my colleagues here said, "Hey, have you heard of him?" Like, no, I haven't. He's a very qualified scholar. You should come for a class. It's like, I've got work, but okay, let me try and make time. And I attended a class. And oh my God, the first class I attended, I was just wowed because he has a very different way of thinking. And he keeps encouraging, like, his basic idea is he encourages us and he says, think properly. Like it is one of his most common phrases, think properly, think properly. And it really hits you because his way of thinking, like I'd never, you have the hadith of like Iman, Islam, Ihsan, and all of that. And you learn about the pillars of Iman, the pillars of Islam, and so on. But I'd never heard it described the way that he did, where he talked about Iman, to have true Iman. He says, look, most of us are born Muslims and we have this Muslim identity, but we haven't really like gone through that process of true Iman like a convert has gone through. And so we're like, yeah, we're Muslim, but we don't like truly believe, like we haven't gone through this, like, I guess, process, if I want to call it that. And he described the process of Iman is when you use your mind and you are convinced and you, like, we think like Iman is like belief, right? But the belief comes through cognitive work, through looking around you and recognizing the signs of Allah, or reading the Quran and recognizing those signs of Allah, because we have the ayat of the universe and the ayat of the Quran. And he talked about, like, to achieve Iman, you have to go through this process of really like questioning and observing and using your senses and using your mind and using your intellect. And that's how you achieve Iman. And I think it was like a 40 hadith of Nawawi class or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, I've never heard anything like that before. And so I attended one class and I was like, I'm going to attend the next class, the next class, the next class. So he was in California for a week. And I also, he was staying at my sister's house, is how it kind of worked out. And so I was like, I'm leaving my house and staying in that house for a week too. I ended up spending the entire week with him and just staying attached to him every class, every moment. He's going hiking. Okay, I'm going with him. He's going to the beach. I'm going with him, and became kind of a fanboy, in that 1 week. And that's how the journey started. But as I learned more from him, I started realizing why I like learning from him, because number one is like this focus on thinking and using our brain, and how he keeps reminding us that Allah gave us all these blessings, right? He gave us eyes to see with, he gave us hands to do with, and he gave us a brain to think with. So he wants you to use the brain. And the number one way to use the brain is to get guided. And then it's not just for this life, it's also for the afterlife. And so that was one piece. And the other one I realized is the way he teaches, he does not need you or want you to agree with him. He goes, here's my thought. What do you think? You tell me, right? And so he gives you that freedom and that leeway and says, I don't want you to become like akramis. I don't want you to just follow me. You will give me pleasure if you just learn how to think and be independent and come up with your own conclusions to things. So I think those were some of the things that attracted me to him. And then I found out that his institute has a program in the UK, and I just joined that and started studying with him.
Is that where you could do more formal studies, post Quran, post Arabic, through Salam Institute?
Yeah, so I actually ended up doing 2 alamiyas. One of them is like there's the standard, there's an Islami system that you follow, like Darul Qasim follows that as well.
Sure.
It's the system of the subcontinent, where you go through like the 6 books of hadith, and there's a certain way of studying fiqh and so on. So I did that one. And I also studied the As-Salam Institute, which is a very different way. So As-Salam Institute follows the way of Nadwatul Ulama, Darul Ulum Nadwatul Ulama in Lucknow, where Shaykh Akram himself studied, where you don't necessarily go through and finish all of the books that you've studied, but you focus a lot on the methodology of the book. So before you pick up any book, you go spend a lot of time on who's the author, what was the context in which they were born, what were their objectives, why were those their objectives, what biases might they have had, what was their style of writing, what was the methodology, why did they choose this methodology, how is it different than the methodology of others. And so it's a lot of critical reading of the text. And then you go through and say, where is the author good, where are they correct, and where do they have their weaknesses. And so we would generally we covered many books, and instead of, because you can spend that time to either like finish a book or go really, 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 really deep. So if for example, we studied a hadith, that hadith might have taken 3 hours to study, because the idea was, what is the methodology of Imam al-Bukhari, or what is the methodology of Imam al-Tirmidhi, and let's do that over several years, hours and hours and hours, versus finishing the whole book. So alhamdulillah, I finished one Alamiya program where we kind of finished the books, and then I was able to do this one where we focused more on, let's learn the methodology so that you have the tools yourself to go off and continue your studies on your own.
Now, tying this all together as we finish up, if someone hears this, sure, someone's going to hear this podcast, they're in a corporate career, they may have been a dabbler in Islamic studies, and they realize that it seems like you got into scholarship because there were questions that you wanted to really get into,
Yeah.
essentially, right? If I understand you correctly, it's kind of like the PhD. You ever ask a PhD student like why they did a PhD? It's like, well, there's like I had a question that was like I couldn't sleep because of it, right?
Yeah.
Somebody wakes up, they realize there's something that they want to do in the sense. If they go down this path and they're 35 years old, right? Let's say 35, they're
Yeah.
midlife, mid-career, they've done like Al Maghrib or Darul Qasim weekend courses or whatever, and they want to go down this path. How should they expect their life to look like? Like I assume, like when I first heard of you, I assumed this. I was like, this guy must have like no other hobbies, and he doesn't
Yeah,
sleep.
that's actually not an unfair way to think about it. So I definitely went through several years where people would have classified me as weird. I mean, I'm still weird, but people would have classified me as like this person, like he doesn't come to many social events and he doesn't seem to be like very engaged. He's like he's got his own thing going on, and that's because when you're trying to make up for something, I was trying to make up for not having studied this earlier, and now I have to. I'm not going to take time away from my wife. I have to spend time with her every night, right? Not because I have to, but because I want to, right? That's what I believe nurtures our relationship. Spending time with the spouse, spending time with the kids. They need my time. I can't just ignore them, right? I have to, and I enjoy spending time with them. So, and I can't give up those things, but there are things I can give up. And so, give up TV. I don't know. That was like a long time ago, but like give up a lot of the hobbies, a lot of like things where going out with friends or had to, it's focused work. Right. And so at that time I was just, it's work, it's family, and it's studies. And that's really it. And in fact, I gave up on sleep as well. And when I say give up on sleep, there were many years where I was sleeping 3 to 4 years a night, 3 to 4 hours a night. And I do not think it's a good idea. I do not think that's sustainable. I don't think that's how people should live their lives. But I'll tell you, there were a few years where I did that because I really, really wanted this. And so I really wanted to be able to work and support my family and be with my family and do Islamic studies. And quite frankly, I wanted to do that in a few years without taking like 20 years to do so. And because of that impatience and because of trying to make up for a few years there, I was sleeping very little. I really focused my attention and I said no to everything. And I was being a total weirdo in that sense, right? So I'm not sure if this is like the most practical path. Now, if you do this before marriage, you do this before kids, you realize it late, you can still do it.
Yeah.
Or you can just slow it down a little bit. But that was my approach. It's very focused.
I got you. So, I mean, would you say that, like, what'd you do for your health though? For health? Because like a lot of people, Sheikh Hussein Abdul Sattar in Chicago, similar, you hear similar stories, sleeps 4 hours a night. I remember one time he did the Hajj. When I went to Hajj in 2015, I went to his seminar. I didn't go with him, but I went to a seminar and I remember how he was like with his food. They would offer him like samosas and stuff. He's like, nope. Half a banana. That's it. Water. People who were his students tell me the same thing. How did you how important? I think people energy management when you say 4 hours a night, most people are going to scare. They'll be like, all right, I'm good.
Yeah,
4 hours of sleep a night. But how do you? And if I try to do that, I would just get sick.
Yeah.
So how would you and you're not recommending it either? It seems like.
No.
I guess how did you manage your health in those years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I did a great job, but I did try and find every hack that I could.
Okay.
And so, and I would get sick, right? Like once a year, twice a year, I'd get sick just because I'm not sleeping enough. But it was like, and the sleep hacks apply to this day, right? And so all the standard stuff, know your sleep cycles, they come in usually 90-minute increments, and try and structure your sleep around sleep cycles. So I was trying to get at least 2 sleep cycles a night. Oftentimes I would try and aim for 3 sleep cycles a night. Know that when you take a nap, what's the optimum amount of time to take a nap? And so the NASA studies show, I forget, it's like 22 minutes or 24 minutes, something like that, to take a nap to get optimal brain function, right? To get your memory working, because you also need your brain to function. You can't study without having your brain be functional. So sleep for the optimum time. So I would try to nap for 25 minutes. And it's proven, the research says that if you nap for 25 minutes, biphasic sleep. So if you sleep at night and you sleep during the day, and of course the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but if you sleep in a biphasic manner, as in you sleep twice instead of monophasic, where you just sleep only at night, that nap of 25 minutes is equivalent to one sleep cycle, which is 1.5 hours. So that's a sleep hack right there, right? So if you're sleeping 4.5 hours at night and you're sleeping 25 minutes during the day, it's as if you got 6 hours of sleep, right? And 6 hours, I think, is a lot better than four, 4, 3, 4, something like that, right? So generally speaking, I would be sleeping 4.5 hours, and then I would be taking a nap, which becomes equivalent to 6. Also, know that sleeping before Fajr is much deeper sleep than the sleep after Fajr, right? So try and go to bed at a reasonable hour where you're getting enough sleep before Fajr, right? So all of these things that we learn about, like how to hack your sleep, optimizing naps and sleep cycles and stuff, I was applying all of this, and that was very helpful. And I think people should continue. So instead, like, for example, a healthy thing to do might be to sleep 6 hours at night and then take a nap of 25 minutes in the middle of the day. And that's equivalent to 7.5 hours. And that's the amount of recommended sleep for anyone anyway. So I think you're good, right? It's very doable. I went a little bit on the unhealthy side because I was trying to do a bit much.
Right.
But I would say maybe for most people, slow that down a little bit and get a bit more sleep and optimize it and focus, and you can still do it.
Did you pay attention to your diet as well? Did you like try to make sure that was dialed in, or?
No, I think I think in those early years of study, like I wasn't so focused on it, and I got away with it. But a few years into it, I completely changed my diet. So I guess I started, gaining some fat and things. I'm like, I don't want to be a fat person.
Right.
So for the last several years, I've been way more focused on diet and 6.5 days a week, no processed food, like healthy, good amount of protein and fat in the meals. And once a week, one meal a week, I get to have a cheat meal, but way more focus on diet because you realize as you get older, like you have to control diet, right? I think maybe I was at an age where it wasn't as important. Certainly in your 20s, you can get away with anything. In your 30s, you really should start watching out. In your 40s, you don't have a choice, right?
These days, are you doing any kind of fitness routine as well?
Oh yeah. I work out. I work out every single day. I lift weights like 3-4 times a week. So for sure, like the things that maybe I was avoiding for those few years, I'm full time back into it. Yeah.
Well, South Asian guys in our 40s, right? We have this thing called the widowmaker. You always hear about some brother like 47, 48 years old, good health, just drops dead.
Yeah.
Something we got to be worried about. So Shaykh Umer, Jazakallah khair. If for coming on, I know I kept you over a little bit. We got delayed on the Islamic studies topic, so I apologize. If somebody wants to like find out more about you or reach out, what's the best way for them to do so? Assuming now you're entertaining social gatherings now, maybe.
Someone wants to, I'm happy if I can help people in any way. So I enjoy mentoring. I enjoy teaching. I mean, those are sort of like my passions, and I make sure I find sufficient time for that every week. So if you want to reach out in that regard, I think you can reach out to, I believe my email address is on shaykhx.com, SHAYKHX.com. So even though I'm no longer with SpaceX, having put in my 9 years with Elon at SpaceX, I think I've earned the right to use that Shaykh X domain name. So my email address is on there. Feel free to reach out if I can help in any way.
And I guess if Sheikh Akram's going to be in the United States, they'll probably find you there too.
They will probably find me there. I really try and spend the time with them. And it's not just Sheikh Akram, right? Like, fortunately, like, alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity. You said you were in Morocco speaking to scholars, and that's fantastic. Like, that was one of my motivations for learning Arabic, to like speak well, right? Is going to Spain and finding out that like the Imam of the Masjid speaks fluent Arabic, and being in Morocco and all the scholars are able to speak fluent Arabic. Like, I learned Arabic to read those books that you see in the bookshelf, right?
Yeah.
And later I realized, like, oh my God, like I can understand, but I can't speak with scholars. This is terrible. And so I spent quite a bit of time, I take my family to Egypt. I've taken them last year and the year before, spending quality time myself, learning how to speak, because you realize that actually Arabic is like the universal language of scholars worldwide. Yep. And so that's been quite beneficial in traveling and meeting with scholars worldwide and being able to speak with them and converse and learn from them. Really enjoyed that. So where there is a group of scholars aggregating, senior scholars, I definitely try and be there because I love spending time with them.
Yeah, I saw your Instagram post where you had your picture with Sheikh Abdurrahman Al-Kattani, rahimahullah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
And it was just, alhamdulillah. So yeah, was that in Fez?
That was in Fez, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. So one of my dear friends, he's a graduate of the Qairoin. So
Oh, mashallah.
when I
Yeah, I
went to
love that place.
Fez,
Yeah.
yeah. So if next time you're in Chicago, let me know. I'll link you up with them. And but he had helped me meet Moleh Hashem Al Baghetti in Meknes, who had recently passed away about a year and a half ago. So I went to his house. So to me, it was just like that idea of like visiting Mashaykh in their homes in like in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. I just feels like something that like we just don't have exposure to as much in the United States. And that was the me a big trigger. Like, okay, next time I go, I need to have like some functionality. I had a chance to meet with there's Sayyidah Amina Katani. She's in her 80s. She's
Yeah.
like woman sheikha, and I remember my friend, he's like one of my friends. She's one of my friend's teachers, and he was like, I wanted you to meet her because I wanted your wife to meet her, and I wanted your daughters to meet her. And she spoke like some Arabic and some French, and she was able to like to communicate with my girls in some kind of like through a translator a little bit. So I was like, dang, next time we got to come back with some Arabic for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we understand, because we have a view of scholars in the U.S. and
Yeah.
and we have this culture also of like celebrity shuyukh and so on,
Yep.
but we don't really appreciate, like I spent I met quite a few scholars in Meknes as well, in Fez and Rabat in Morocco, but interestingly enough, in Egypt as well, we went to visit one of my Quran shuyukh, and I took my family with me, and we walk into his apartment, and he's just like sitting there like sweating away because it's hot. He has no ceiling fan, he has no air conditioning, and the windows are just open,
Right.
and he's like just sitting there with his wife, like he just looked exhausted.
Right.
That's the living conditions he's in, and he like is so welcoming and calling us over, and it's like, hey, and he cuts a watermelon for us while sitting on the floor, and he's
Right.
feeding us and taking care of us, and you just learn so much about from their akhlaq, right? And so just, I'm sure you've experienced the same going to Morocco and meeting some of
Yeah.
these senior scholars, is like they're simple people like living their lives with amazing akhlaq, and you realize, and that's one of the things I appreciate about Sheikh Akram, is as much as I appreciate his intellectual side, is you look at him and you're like, he's such a simple person. He's like simple shalwar kameez, like very just like low key, and it's like, wow, like how do we learn to be like that? I love seeing that, and I don't think I am that. Like but I really get inspired by that. It's not just the knowledge, but then like just being a simple abd of Allah.
For sure. And I think that's the example. And I think that's the connection we try to have for ourselves and for our children. So again,
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Umer.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. For listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. For my special guest, Shaykh Umer Khan, I'm your host, Mahinda Podcaster, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.